Do you ever miss those forgotten lunches no one makes anymore? For families in the 1960s through the 1980s, these simple homemade meals filled long days and shaped everyday life. Cold fried apple hand pies were the portable sweetness that turned hard work into something worth savoring. Made from dried apples rehydrated with sugar, cinnamon, and a pinch of nutmeg, the filling was tucked inside thin circles of dough and fried until crisp. Once cooled, they were wrapped in brown paper, stacked neatly in tins, and packed for the next morning's work. By lunchtime, the pastry had softened around the filling, turning chewy and tender without losing its golden flavor. Each bite carried the taste of fall, the comfort of orchards, the scent of dried fruit, and the memory of wood smoke. Families made dozens during apple season, drying fruit on screens so none went to waste through winter. School children unwrapped them eagerly at recess, while farmers or miners found them waiting after hours of labor. Sweet but sturdy, they offered both joy and endurance. No frosting, no fuss, just the kind of dessert that worked as hard as the hands that made it. In every pie was gratitude, proof that simple fruit, a little sugar, and time could make something lasting. Hot dog and bean casserole proved that a few humble ingredients could feed an entire school with room to spare. Thick baked beans simmered in a sweet brown sauce while sliced hot dogs nestled on top, their edges curling as they browned. The aroma of smoky beans and sizzling franks filled every corner of the cafeteria, making even the quietest students perk up. Served with a slice of buttered bread, it was hearty enough to power through gym class and math lessons alike. Children loved the playful surprise of finding extra pieces of hot dog hidden beneath the beans, a small reward for digging deep. The combination of sweet sauce and salty meat created a flavor that still lingers in memory, a reminder of simple pleasures on a school day. It was thrifty, filling, and impossible to forget, the kind of meal that kept students happy and cafeteria workers proud of stretching every dollar to its fullest. Pineapple and cheese salad cups were the weird little lunch that somehow ended up in almost every community cookbook back in the day. You grabbed a can of pineapple rings, scooped cottage cheese right in the center, sprinkled on shredded cheddar, and if you were really fancy, served the whole thing on a lettuce leaf. It looked impressive in those black and white church bulletins, but really, this was all about making canned food stretch into something that passed for lunch. Canned pineapple was cheap, cottage cheese was always chilling in the fridge, and cheddar somehow found its way into everything. It sounds wild now, but people loved the mix. Sweet, salty, creamy, and a little crunchy if you added walnuts or celery. Moms tossed these together for luncheons, potlucks, or the days when cooking felt like too much work. It was fast, weirdly filling, and cost next to nothing. You could find this recipe clipped to refrigerator doors or tucked into those old spiral-bound cookbooks every kitchen drawer seemed to have. Creamed corn and bacon on toast was one of the best meals to ever make for yourself. I know we've had a fair amount of toast-based dishes, but there really were so many things you could do. The format is timeless. Now, spreading bacon bits on toast isn't exactly anything we would call revolutionary, but the idea of adding creamed corn onto it as well? Now we're talking. Corn has always had an extremely warm place in most people's hearts because it's just a crop that's always there for you. It's really easy to grow, and almost every farming household or town would have an ample supply of corn. They'd dedicate a chunk of their land to it if they could, because it wasn't just good, nutritious, and free food, it was also good for trading. But you can't do any of that without a good breakfast, and that's also where corn is a great friend to have. Creamed corn with bacon on toast was also something people made sandwiches out of by adding olives, jalapenos, and other toppings to it to make it more exciting and filling. Usually, kids wouldn't really settle for just creamed corn on toast, so it was a lot easier to make a sandwich out of it for them. The egg and cress sandwich is literally so perfect yet basic that it makes no sense this dish ever faded into the sidelines. Hard-boiled eggs get chopped up and mixed with mayonnaise or butter before they're topped with a generous serving of cress between 2 slices of soft white bread. This is an egg salad if I've ever heard of one, and the creamy richness of it combined with the peppery crest makes for a refreshing, zingy bite that really knocks you into the present moment. Egg and cress sandwiches are something you would consider British, right? Just off of the vibes? You'd be smart to assume that. This sandwich was a really popular choice in the middle of the 20th century, especially because after World War II, rationing might have eased up. But that doesn't mean that meat became widely available overnight. These days, egg and cress sandwiches are just a retro memory, but they used to be the ideal lunch to take to work or school. Cornbread and buttermilk is pretty much as Southern as it gets. It's something that's completely a classic comfort food of the South. And cornbread is something that has a deeply rich history in that region anyway, almost as rich as the flavor. Especially when you pair it with sweet buttermilk. Cornbread is this crumbly bread that's made with cornmeal if you didn't already know. People would typically just have it ready in a cast iron skillet so that it would get those nice little crispy edges that you all love so much. You pair that up with buttermilk, and it adds an entirely new level of richness and texture to the dish that just wasn't there before. Cornbread and buttermilk is a combination that's deeply rooted in Southern culinary traditions. This goes all the way back to the Native American tribes that first taught European settlers how to harvest and cultivate corn and really take advantage of it. The Southern version didn't get its start in life until after the Civil War, which is when cornmeal started to become more widely used, mostly because it was affordable again. Cold fried catfish fillets were Friday's triumph and Saturday's carryover reward. In river towns, families rose early to catch catfish at dawn, cleaning and frying them in cornmeal and lard before the day's heat set in. The best pieces were eaten hot, but a few were saved for later, wrapped in paper and tucked away. By the next day, the fish had firmed up, its flavor richer and smoky from the oil. Cold, it was still perfect, dense, seasoned, and satisfying without a single reheat. Workers packed it in tins, sometimes with sliced onion or a jar of pickles for sharpness. It was food that spoke of place and patience, of hands that knew the rhythm of rivers. No waste, no luxury, just honest nourishment pulled from water and grit. Every bite carried the taste of Southern creeks, the scent of frying oil, and the sound of morning reels spinning. It was simplicity, perfected, made by those who trusted skill and hard work over wealth. Cold or hot, fried catfish stayed the same, steady, filling, and rooted in the life it came from. Meatloaf with ketchup glaze stood tall as the definition of classic comfort, sliced into neat rectangles that fit perfectly on the plastic tray compartments. Ground beef was mixed with breadcrumbs, eggs, and onions, then baked until the edges browned. Just before serving, a layer of ketchup was spread on top and caramelized to a sweet, tangy finish that gleamed under the cafeteria lights. The aroma of roasted beef and warm ketchup wafted through the lunchroom, signaling a meal that felt like home even on the busiest school day. Children enjoyed the contrast of the tender interior with the sticky, flavorful glaze, often sneaking bites before sitting down. It was hearty enough to power through long afternoons of lessons and playground games, a dependable dish that never disappointed. Meatloaf with ketchup glaze remains a beloved memory, proof that even the simplest recipes can create lasting comfort when shared with a room full of hungry students eager for something warm and familiar. Jellied chicken salad cups were the quirky retro lunch you probably saw at your grandmother's house or flipped past in old homemaker guides. You made chicken salad, shredded chicken, mayo, celery, a little seasoning, and then set the whole thing in gelatin until it firmed up. It sounds strange now, but back then, this was peak luncheon presentation. You scooped the wobbly salad into lettuce leaves, added a sprig of parsley or a cherry tomato, and served it cold. It was light, chilled, and looked fancier than the ingredients actually were. These showed up at potlucks, garden parties, and quick family lunches when the oven stayed off and time was short. Gelatin molds made everything feel more polished, even when it came straight from leftovers and pantry basics. Old cookbooks loved recipes like this because they stretched food, required no cooking, and made lunch look impressive with barely any effort. It might feel out of place today, but jellied chicken salad cups were fast, filling, and weirdly fun when they first hit the table. Around the later half of the 20th century, there was this big public paranoia that had spread concerning health and the after effects of the way Americans had been eating. Thanks to all that rage, we got dishes like vegetable aspic cups. See, Lots of Americans were coming home to an angry mom, a worried wife, or a dad who just kept saying he wouldn't pay for the doctor's fees when your eating habits would eventually circle back around to bite you. It kind of did set fear into people's hearts, especially since the arguments were so convincing. Who could deny that they were eating Kentucky Fried Chicken and McDonald's like addicts back then, or even now? That's why there was this newfound room for fusion food or experimental recipes like vegetable aspic cups. Before, you could tell somebody about vegetables that were set in these tomato-flavored gelatins, and they'd just laugh at you. A chilled salad on top of that? But thanks to how easy convenience food culture had made things, with how you could just buy gelatin and frozen veggies whenever you needed, this was actually a really solid and healthy work lunch option. Bacon fat crackers are the definition of making use of whatever you have on hand. These little greasy bacon bastards are something you get by mixing bacon fat with flour, salt, and a little bit of sugar. Then, you roll the dough out as thin as you can and begin baking until you get that perfectly golden color we all know and love. The end result is arguably the best cracker you've ever had the pleasure of eating. It's delicious and smoky, and it has a salty aftertaste from the bacon fat, which makes every bite a meat lover's dream. The texture is light but really crispy, and the richness of the flavor is enough to sound all the alarms in your taste buds. Bacon fat crackers are one of those southern snacks that came out of the zero-waste mentality most people had towards their food, especially when it came to making use of stuff like meat. Bacon was an especially prized ingredient, and the leftover fat was something people tried to preserve as much as they could, whenever they could. People would use it in frying and cooking vegetables, or even their baking. It was also just a really good way to stretch ingredients when times were tough. Now, on a boring day at work, maybe the last place your mind would go to is an equally boring meal, right? Potato cakes from leftover mash were the quiet heroes of mountain kitchens. You mixed yesterday's mashed potatoes with flour, salt, and maybe an egg if you had one, then fried them in lard until the edges turned crisp. They were soft inside and golden outside, wrapped in cloth to stay warm for the noontime break. Whether eaten with onions or just plain, they were the kind of food that filled the stomach and felt familiar. They started as supper leftovers but became a comfort in their own right, passed from hand to hand in lunch tins and brown paper. Nothing fancy, just good sense and good flavor. Every family had their way of making them, but they all shared the same goal: stretching a meal into tomorrow. Egg salad on rye brought a protein-packed punch to the lunchroom, combining chopped hard-boiled eggs with mayonnaise and a hint of mustard before piling the creamy mixture onto hearty rye bread. The earthy scent of rye mingled with the richness of the eggs, creating a sandwich that felt substantial and grown up. Children who usually turned away from plain boiled eggs found new appreciation in the velvety filling, its tangy flavor balanced by the bread's subtle spice. The bright yellow of the yolks peeked out from the edges, making each slice look inviting even before the first bite. It paired perfectly with a small carton of milk and a crisp apple, offering both nourishment and flavor without a heavy sauce. Teachers praised it as a model of balanced nutrition, while students enjoyed the way it held together neatly for quick bites between conversations. Egg salad on rye remains a memory of wholesome simplicity, a sandwich that satisfied hunger and offered quiet comfort during a busy school day. Cornbread pancakes with applesauce were the sweet, savory shortcut lunch you could pull together when the pantry looked bare, but you still wanted something warm. You grabbed a box of Jiffy cornbread mix, stirred in some water or milk, dropped spoonfuls into a hot skillet, and fried up little golden pancakes. They were crisp around the edges, soft in the center, and ready in minutes. Most folks topped them with a dollop of cold applesauce straight from the jar for that sweet, salty combination everyone quietly loved. It was a weird mix, but it worked, especially when groceries were low and creativity was high. Old-school lunch menus listed these because they were filling, fast, and cheap, making them a favorite for busy parents or frugal school cafeterias. You could dress them up with honey or butter, but the classic stayed simple: cornbread cakes with a scoop of applesauce, ready in 10 minutes flat. It was comfort food that took little effort and brought just enough sweetness to brighten a rough day. Cucumber and onion sandwiches were a really simple and refreshing butter, mayonnaise, different kinds of spices, and sometimes bits of bacon and ham on top of cucumbers. See, now I don't know if you guys will agree with me, but cucumbers really have a good place in the world of sandwiches and burgers. They're one of the most light toppings you can add, they're abundant, they're good for you, that crunchy bite is immaculate, and they work well with most kinds of sauces. It's a really straightforward dish that can work with almost anything you happen to have on hand. And on a hot summer day, this was the perfect meal to eat for your work lunch. It was served as an interlude between the usual fried, oily, and greasy food most Americans were used to anyway. Onions were something that everyone always had, and this could work with fresh or stale bread. They were beloved mostly for their detoxifying effects and how refreshing a cucumber can be. Textile workers and coal miners in particular loved these because it would take the edge off. The miner's pasty is something with an incredibly serious backstory. It's this handheld meat and potato pie that gets wrapped in a crumpled pastry. Usually the pastries were pretty thick too, and a host of ingredients on the inside. I'm talking diced beef, potatoes, Swede rutabaga, caramelized or just sliced onions, and a generous sprinkle of salt and pepper. This meal was designed to survive a few rounds in hell because it was made so that it would last you the entire day. The target audience for the meal was laborers and people who worked physically intensive jobs, but they wanted to make the kind of thing that these sorts of workers could still carry around in their bags or pockets. The flavor is also something that really helps restore your spunk for the next shift. It's earthy, homey, and rich. The kind of thing that really feels like a home-cooked meal as soon as you bite into it. Miners' pasties were the go-to lunch for a lot of different kinds of miners everywhere, not to be confused with the Cornish tin pasties we just talked about. Miners would typically rely exclusively on these because these things were built for the rough life. No plates, spoons, or forks are needed, only your hands and how fast you can finish these and clock back in at work. Ham hock and pinto bean pouches were lunches that filled the belly and lasted through the longest days. A single ham hock simmered with a pot of pintos could feed a family for days, the broth thickening into a smoky stew that needed nothing more. Whatever remained after supper was ladled into wax paper pouches or small jars for the next day's work. By noon, the beans had soaked up every ounce of flavor, turning creamy, hearty, and rich. Workers in sawmills, fields, and mines tore open their packets, scooped the contents out with a biscuit, and called it a meal. Salt from the ham kept it savory, the starch from the beans kept it filling, and the slow simmering made it comforting in a way only patience could create. It was food built to last, simple, nourishing, and deeply honest. No one left hungry, and nothing went to waste. Each bite carried the memory of home kitchens and the hum of pots left simmering on wood stoves. It wasn't elegant, but it was strong food, made for strong hands, feeding strength back into the very people who earned it every single day. Goulash Midwest style filled giant steel pans with elbow macaroni, ground beef, and a slow-simmered tomato sauce that could stretch to feed an entire cafeteria. The noodles soaked up the savory juices until every bite delivered both comfort and fullness, making it a reliable favorite when budgets were tight. Lunch ladies stirred vats of the bubbling mixture with long wooden paddles, and the smell of tomatoes and browned beef drifted down school hallways, luring students long before the bell rang. A sprinkle of dried oregano or a dash of black pepper was the only seasoning needed to make it feel like a special treat. Children returned for second helpings, knowing the warmth of that simple dish would carry them through the afternoon's lessons. It was hearty, inexpensive, and endlessly adaptable, a dish that symbolized how school kitchens turned plain staples into memorable meals. Goulash Midwest style remains a shining example of how resourceful cooking and a little spice transformed ordinary ingredients into a lunch many still crave today. Canned mushroom soup over toast was the heavy hot lunch that filled bellies fast when groceries were low and no one had time to cook. You opened a can of cream of mushroom soup, heated it on the stove, poured it over buttered toast slices, and called it done. It was quick, salty, warm, and showed up in almost every old-school cookbook as a no-fuss meal for tight grocery weeks. Families leaned on it during cold winters, rushed afternoons, or whenever the fridge looked empty but people still needed to eat. It stuck to your ribs, filled you up, and somehow made basic pantry ingredients stretch just a little further. Some folks dressed it up with black pepper, shredded cheese, or canned peas if they had them, but the plain version, soup over toast, was the classic. You would find this little meal in lunch guides, old diner menus, and those faded recipe cards passed down through families. It was simple, a little salty, and proof that even the most basic pantry staples could pull together lunch when money was tight and time was short. So, bar none, the best breakfast to start your day with was always cream chipped beef on toast. It wasn't really the most visually impressive or appealing dish, but it had a certain kind of coziness to it. Maybe it's the kind of vibe you cultivate after being a household breakfast item for years. Maybe they just liked the simplicity. All you had to do was get some toast, a can of chipped beef, and you were pretty much done. Maybe they wanted to be like their brave army because this was also one of the most widespread military breakfasts. It could be the texture, or it could be that it's an easy source of protein early in the morning. But given how all of these are likely, that really tells you just how popular of a breakfast this ended up becoming. Not only that, it was one of the most economical ways to get some beef in your diet. That was just a cut of meat that was too hard to afford regularly for most working-class families. Stew in a thermos is really a classic. This is something that combines a lot of different things to make a unique meal that you wouldn't think of on your own. A thermos is something you usually use for drinks. It doesn't always have to be water, but stew's in there? Not really anyone's first thought. For those who need a warm meal right on the go, though, this was the most reliable thing in the world, especially when you would be working in the winter. Thick and tender chunks of meat mixed in with roto vegetables like carrots and potatoes and simmered in a rich and flavorful broth that gets thickened up even more with some flour and cornstarch. I mean, what's not to like? The flavor oozes out of that thermos as soon as you open it is next level. Stew in a thermos was a game changer for workers during the 50s and 60s. It didn't matter what your job was, whether you were a truck driver, worked a night shift in a factory, or ran numbers behind a desk. Even kids in school would take it along with them. The thermos lets you pack a hearty and warm meal that could pretty much survive hours inside the bottle without losing its essence. You had to have some trial and error here first, though, because most people would often make the stew too liquidy on their first try or two, and it would end up spilling over once you unscrewed the lid. Thermos-steeped stew became something of a regional favorite in northern areas where the temperature was really known to drop, and I think it's a cute little dish we could bring back today too. Sorghum syrup sandwiches were sugar for the poor and fuel for the strong. A thick smear of dark syrup between two biscuits or slices of white bread turned into instant energy for men working fields or hauling timber. Sorghum grew easy in southern soil, and the syrup mills were the heart of many small towns come harvest season. The sandwich itself was sticky and simple, sweetness caught between starch, just messy enough to make it real. It was the kind of food children would sneak before chores, and grown folks would pack for long days when they needed something to push them through. Sorghum was more than a sweetener. It was survival in a jar, and it stayed good for months. The taste was rich, earthy, and honest, a little bitter around the edges, just like life itself. Hot turkey sandwich with gravy delivered pure comfort, a hearty open-faced meal served on thick slices of white bread. Tender roasted turkey was layered generously and then drenched in rich brown gravy until the bread soaked up every drop of savory flavor. The aroma of slow-simmered poultry and warm spices filled the air, giving students a taste of a Sunday family dinner right in the middle of the school week. Steam rose from each plate as the sandwiches were ladled and passed down the line, and the gravy's glossy sheen promised a stick-to-your-ribs satisfaction. Children cut through the soft bread with the side of their forks, letting the gravy pool across their trays, while teachers welcomed the quiet that followed as everyone enjoyed each comforting bite. It was filling enough to last through recess and the longest math lessons, a simple but memorable dish that remains vivid in the memories of those who lined up for seconds. Cream cheese and olive sandwiches were once the fancy tea lunch that quietly slipped onto regular kitchen tables when people needed something fast. You whipped cream cheese until fluffy, stirred in chopped green olives, and spread the whole mix onto rye or white bread. It sounds strange now, but back then, this salty, creamy combo was considered upscale, especially if you cut the crusts off. It showed up at luncheons, garden parties, and even school lunches when moms wanted to make something that looked like they tried. Old cookbooks listed it under easy entertaining, but most folks made it because it came together in 5 minutes and filled you up without cooking a thing. Some people swapped in pimento olives or added sliced cucumbers, but the classic version stayed simple, creamy, salty, and fast. It may not win over modern taste buds, but for families watching the clock and the grocery bill, these little sandwiches were a retro shortcut that stuck around when time was tight. Bologna and cheese stackers were pretty much the ideal American breakfast, something that carried the spirit of our nation as well as all the flavors we've grown to love. Sliced bologna would be layered with cheese from the finest wheels in all of the United States of America. It would be packed in wax paper too, which was a funny little trick, but I'll explain why it was so popular. See, the thing about wax paper is that it traps moisture and flavor in, and that means your stackers stay perfectly fine just the way they were after you first made them. Bologna was always something we've had a deep appreciation for, and this stacker variant just proved that no matter how much the landscape of American cuisine changes, some habits die hard, and some just don't die at all. Not only was it just a good thing to eat before or after work, it was the perfect lunch to carry in a box with you. Plus, by the end of the 20th century, most offices had microwaves too, and you could always just find slices of bologna for cheap at most convenience stores. It was this kind of low-effort, easy-to-source and assemble style of cooking that would overtake America soon enough, and I think that's a part of why a lot of us prefer a latte instead of a sandwich now, ironically enough. Scotch eggs are actually a funny one. You would most commonly associate them with pub culture in Britain, right? I mean, that's how most people think of them. That's their history too. People would get off work or get a lunch break and decide to hit the local pub with the lads for a few Scotch eggs. What really are they, though? A Scotch egg is just an egg packed with protein. It's a hard-boiled or soft-boiled egg that gets this blanket of seasoned sausage meat, and nestled inside that, it gets coated in breadcrumbs, upon which it gets deep-fried until it's completely golden brown. So yeah, it's definitely one calorically dense egg, but that also makes it perfect for work because you can carry 2 or 3 of these and they fill you up right away. The crust is exactly as crispy as you're thinking it is, by the way, and I know you're getting ideas of how succulent this must be to bite into. Let me tell you, you're right on the money. The spiced pork on the inside is something divine, and the creamy egg center just brings everything together for the perfect flavor experience. The flavors also change depending on what spices you use and what herbs you pair it with, so you can really experiment a lot with this dish. Hoe cake cornbread was humble food with the weight of generations behind it. Mixed from cornmeal, salt, and water, it was poured thin into a skillet or, long ago, onto the flat of a hoe blade held over an open fire. It crisped at the edges and stayed tender in the middle, strong enough to hold beans, greens, or slices of salt pork. Each cake was both meal and utensil, eaten with calloused fingers and quiet gratitude. Hoe cake cornbread carried the flavor of smoke and history, of families who worked from dawn to dark and gave thanks for even the smallest blessings. It was simple food, but never small in meaning, a recipe that traveled through generations, feeding hearts as much as stomachs. Stuffed green peppers turned ordinary bell peppers into little edible packages of flavor and nourishment. Each hollowed pepper was filled with seasoned rice, ground beef, and tomato sauce before being baked until tender and juicy. As they roasted, the peppers softened while the filling absorbed every bit of the tangy tomato flavor, releasing an aroma that tempted even picky eaters. Lunchroom workers lined the peppers in neat rows on wide baking sheets, creating a colorful sight that brightened the cafeteria. Children discovered the joy of cutting into the pepper and watching the savory filling spill onto their trays. It was a dish that required patience to prepare, yet its popularity made the effort worthwhile for kitchen staff who took pride in every batch. Stuffed green peppers brought a taste of home-style cooking to the school day, proof that even in a bustling cafeteria, care and tradition could shine through. Many remember it as a meal that felt like dinner served at noon. You would find this recipe scribbled on index cards, stuck in old cookbooks, or just passed along by word of mouth. It might sound like an oddball now, but back then, Spam and pickles were a lunchroom classic that got families through tight days. Egg salad with sweet pickle relish was the batch-made lunch that carried families through hot summers, last-minute picnics, and quick work breaks. You boiled up some eggs, peeled them, chopped them, mixed in mayo, sweet pickle relish, a little salt and pepper, and scooped the whole thing onto soft sandwich bread or rolls. It was creamy, tangy, and came together fast, especially if the eggs were boiled ahead of time. Old cookbooks loved this one because it was practical, frugal, and ready in under 10 minutes if you planned right. It filled up hungry bellies when grocery money was tight, and kids happily took it to school tucked in wax paper wraps. Some folks dressed it up with celery or paprika, but the sweet pickle relish was the real shortcut, adding just enough kick to brighten up plain eggs and mayo. You would find this recipe in faded lunchbox guides, community cookbooks, or scribbled on note cards in kitchen drawers. It might not win awards today, but back then, it was one of those quick, comforting lunches that kept families fed when every dollar counted. Cornish pasty was a portable meal that was an essential food for one specific group of people: miners. In Michigan, Pennsylvania, Montana, and other popular mining regions in the United States, this was the meal to have every day. It came from Cornwall, England, and it was this handheld meat and potato pie that became so beloved by coal, copper, and iron ore miners. These miners would always be working in dirty, dark, damp, and dangerous caverns, and they had no way to really ever wash their hands in the middle of work. It's not like people were going to be investing in or carrying bottles of sanitizer. The pasties, though, weren't going to be a problem in this regard. You could hold them up by the crust and just eat the filling. Of course, this meant that miners would have to throw away the crust, but you were still eating the majority of the meal. This was also durable, and it could stay warm for hours and hours, which made it ideal for miners. Despite what you might think, some of those mines really get low temperature-wise. It was also something that Cornish miners brought into the country when they eventually immigrated. They had settled in American mining towns in the 1800s, and these pasties have been a tradition in America as well ever since. Beef dripping toast is pretty much entirely nostalgic comfort food. Let me run you by a typical dripping-based toast. You take some thick slices of crusty bread, which ideally should be warm or toasted, but will work with whatever the day gives us. You slather on some beef drippings and some salt, pepper, malt vinegar, and whatever else you really like on your toast, and you're good to go. Beef drippings are just the rendered fat from roasts, and most of the time they still have the little browned jelly bits mixed in with the toast. As far as flavors go, you want to imagine a deep umami with a real buttery richness, something that hits like a cozy blanket on a cold day. It's almost as if toast and your regular 20th century Sunday roast had an incredibly greasy baby meant for breakfasts. Beef dripping toast wasn't just popular in America with the working class. It was the same deal in Britain, and it was served for, honestly, any meal of the day. Dirty cheap, really filling, and something that takes about 15 minutes to prepare? Yeah, nobody was going to be letting go of this recipe anytime soon. Apple stack cake slices were the mountain answer to store-bought sweets, and they lasted long enough to pack for lunch. Layers of molasses cake were stacked with cooked-down dried apples that had been mashed into a thick jam. You wrapped it tight in wax paper, and by noon the cake had softened and the apple filling had settled deep into every layer. These slices were never fancy, but they were the closest thing to dessert most folks saw during a workday. They carried the taste of fall orchards and wood stoves even when eaten under the summer sun. If you were lucky enough to get one in your pail, it was probably made by a grandmother who measured sweetness by memory, not spoons. The sugar was scarce, the flour stretched thin, but the effort behind it was rich. It was a small comfort after long hours in the field or at the mill, reminding everyone that even in lean times, there was room for something kind and homemade. cabbage and bacon slaw sandwiches were a working man's quick fix straight from the garden and skillet. When cabbage was plentiful and nothing from a hog was wasted, this meal came together with ease. Fresh cabbage was chopped fine, tossed in a pan of hot bacon grease, seasoned with salt, pepper, and sometimes a dash of vinegar or sugar for balance. Once cooled, it was spooned onto bread or leftover biscuits, packed tight for lunch. The mix stayed crisp yet savory, the smoky fat deepening as the hours passed. By noon, it had turned into something richer than it seemed, a sandwich both sharp and soothing. It was cheap, quick, and loaded with flavor, the kind that cut through weariness after long shifts. Every bite carried the proof that good food didn't depend on plenty, only on care. In homes where gardens met smokehouses, this was daily genius, born from habit and hunger. The slaw sandwich stood as a quiet anthem of thrift, the taste of comfort made from what was at hand. Even cold, it satisfied, whispering of early mornings, frying bacon, and the scent of cabbage fresh from the dirt. Baked corn pudding brought a gentle sweetness to the lunch line, a golden casserole where fresh or canned corn mingled with eggs, milk, and a touch of sugar. When the pans emerged from the oven, the top was lightly browned while the inside stayed soft and custardy, a perfect balance of savory and sweet. Children loved the way the kernels popped against the creamy base, offering a satisfying texture with every bite. The smell of warm corn and butter greeted students as they shuffled their trays forward, promising comfort before the first spoonful. Teachers praised it as a vegetable dish, while kids simply enjoyed it as an unexpected treat that felt almost like dessert. It paired well with roasted meats or stood alone as a hearty side that filled empty stomachs without fuss. Baked corn pudding captured the spirit of the 1960s cafeteria. Simple, nourishing, and quietly indulgent, a dish that made an ordinary school day taste like a Sunday dinner. Cold macaroni ring mold with tuna was the kind of no-cook lunch you either loved or never wanted to see again, but back in the day, it was everywhere. You cooked elbow macaroni ahead of time, chilled it, then mixed in canned tuna, mayo, and peas, pouring the whole thing into a gelatin mold. After a quick trip to the fridge, it came out shaped like a perfect ring, ready for slicing. It sounds a little strange, but in church luncheons, potlucks, and quick summer meals, this was considered fancy and practical. Moms loved it because there was no cooking when the house was already boiling hot, and the ingredients were cheap pantry staples. The gelatin molds made it look like more effort went into lunch than actually did. You sliced off a wedge, maybe threw a little lettuce or parsley on the plate, and that was it. Lunch was ready, cold, filling, and good enough to impress the neighbors. It might not win over modern taste buds, but back then, this molded tuna salad was the fast-track ticket to a retro lunch that felt special when time was short. Stuffed hot dog boats were something that were really popular among working-class families. This is because a lot of these meals so far are really practical and good for sustainable, everyday use, but they're a little lacking in the fun factor. Stuffed hot dog boats made up for this, though. They were kid-friendly, and they became something of a novelty meal with how much children ended up taking to them. They were also really popular in church cookbooks as a budget-friendly and creative dish. The idea behind a stuffed hot dog boat was that you would slice the dog right down the middle and then fill it with different kinds of toppings, kind of like a boat. These toppings would typically be baked beans, mashed potatoes, chili and cheese, or bacon bits. Anything on hand would work really, and people would experiment and play around with different kinds of fillings. Either way, it was a dish that was just fun to make, especially with your kids. It was also the kind of thing that was genuinely filling because of the way it was built. You could end up consuming more than your daily protein needs just off of one or two of these. Let's talk pork pies for a hot second. Basically, these were the original British meat snacks, and a lot of immigrants that first came on over to America popularized this dish as a working-class old reliable that you could whip up whenever you wanted. A classic pork pie is this round pastry jam-packed with ground pork, tucked into a firm and crumbly hot water crust. The top is usually sealed, and you have a layer of pork jelly poured in after baking, which sets as soon as the meat begins to cool. I know that might sound like a bit much, but it really does work. Also, the peppery seasonings aren't something you can miss here. They really make the dish stand out, and the cold, dense pork center contrasts amazingly well with the buttery crust. It's something that people preferred eating cold because that's when everything would truly set in, and the jelly would be at its best. But you could have it hot too. Pork pies are genuinely a vintage recipe though, going back all the way to medieval England. They took off in the 16th century. They were a massive hit with fox hunters, and the only ones that could hunt those were upper-class dudes in red coats. Eventually, it became a no-nonsense meal that everybody knew about. Homemade bologna and chow chow sandwiches were the Hill Country's proud reply to city deli fare. The bologna, ground from pork trimmings and spiced with pepper, garlic, and smoke, was sliced thick and fried until its edges curled and browned. Between two slices of white or cornbread, it met a spoonful of bright chow chow relish, sharp with vinegar, sweet with cabbage, onions, and green tomatoes. The mix was both hearty and lively, turning simple ingredients into a sandwich that tasted far richer than it cost. Mill workers, field hands, and school children carried them alike, wrapped tight in paper for long days ahead. Chow chow was a pantry jewel made each autumn from the vegetables left behind after harvest. Nothing was wasted, and every jar told of careful hands and patient hearts. When that tangy relish met hot bologna, it sparked something cheerful, a reminder that home-cooked food could rival anything fancy or store-bought. The flavor was sharp, smoky, and proud, standing for a way of life that prized making do and making well. It was the taste of resourcefulness, sealed in a jar and shared across generations. Apple Brown Betty was a thrifty yet deeply comforting dessert, layering sliced apples with buttery breadcrumbs and warm cinnamon before baking until golden and bubbling. The scent of spiced fruit filled the cafeteria as pans emerged from the ovens, instantly making mouths water. Each serving combined tender apples with a crisp, buttery topping that felt both rustic and indulgent. Children loved breaking through the crunchy layer to reach the sweet, soft fruit beneath. A small moment of delight in the middle of the school day. It paired perfectly with a small scoop of vanilla ice cream when the budget allowed, but was just as satisfying on its own. Teachers admired its simplicity and use of affordable ingredients, a nod to both economy and flavor. Apple Brown Betty turned ordinary apples into a dessert that felt like a holiday treat, ensuring its place in the warm memories of countless students who once lined up with eager trays. Fried bologna with mustard on toast was the quick stovetop lunch that somehow managed to taste better than it had any right to. You sliced bologna, tossed it in a hot pan, watched it curl up at the edges, and slapped it on toasted bread with a smear of yellow mustard. That was it. Lunch in under 10 minutes. It was salty, tangy, crispy around the edges, and showed up everywhere from lunch counters to kitchen tables when the grocery list was running short. Bologna was cheap, lasted forever in the fridge, and frying it gave it just enough of a glow-up to make it feel like more than sandwich meat. Some folks added a slice of cheese or swapped in rye bread, but the classic stayed simple and fast. Fried bologna with mustard was not glamorous, but it hit the spot when you needed something filling, salty, and satisfying without much effort. It was a staple in school lunchrooms, factory break rooms, and busy homes, sticking around because it was affordable, reliable, and always ready when the clock was ticking. Carrot and raisin salad sandwiches were the prime example of how to make something healthy not taste like death. They were the best thing to have whenever you would visit the countryside, and even people in urban areas started to adopt this recipe. That's because when you see a genuinely good deal, you just don't let it go. And there's rarely a deal as good as this one. Raisins were shelf-stable, sweet, naturally full of sugar, and they could last for weeks if kept properly. Just a bit of Miracle Whip would do wonders for the dish, too. Carrots, on the other hand, were extremely cheap, reasonable to buy in bulk, and for most people in the countryside, a standard crop that they were already growing. They only required some grating and mixing, and it basically was the perfect summer dish because of how refreshing it was. I'm sure the experience of melting in the summer and being forced to deal with the fact that you're an adult human is one we all dread. In times like that, and since it's summer, it's always like that, you want to really spend as little time in the kitchen as possible. A dish like this works even better because you have to spend all of 15 minutes to get it done, and in return, you get a whole haul of goodies. Vitamin A, natural sugar content, fiber, and my mom used to tell me carrots helped improve your memory. So if you're looking to try a new kind of salad, this 60s sensation is probably for you. A cold baked bean sandwich is what you think it is. It's just cold. 2 slices of modest bread, a familiar presence in the tomato-based sauce, with a generous spread of baked beans. The flavor is something that's a little bit sweet, a little bit tangy, but it's really just the textures that work here so well. The bread is chewy, but the beans mesh together as soon as you bite into them, and as the little bits of sauce squeezed out when you bite into the sandwich, it all makes for one flavorful bite. Cold baked bean sandwiches were a pretty common go-to lunch meal for people in the middle of the 20th century, especially in American households. This was even more true during the 40s, especially among blue-collar workers. Factory towns would often see people buying as much as canned beans as they could during grocery trips. People had a pretty practical approach to their food during these decades, and while the sandwich had no presentation or flair, it definitely got the job done. And it could do that for you today as well, because this is still as reliable of lunch now as it was back then, especially if you're pressed for time. Leftover grit cakes were another trick from kitchens that never believed in waste. When breakfast grits cooled and hardened overnight, they were sliced into tidy slabs and dropped into a pan of bacon drippings until each side turned golden brown and crisp. What came out looked plain, but carried the soul of comfort. A poor man's polenta that filled the stomach and lifted the heart. Some ate them drizzled with syrup, others topped them with salt pork, or dipped them in molasses if luck allowed. They were easy to pack, easy to eat, and steady enough to power a long day in the field or mill. Each bite reminded folks that resourcefulness was its own kind of wealth. No one with grit cakes went hungry. They were the morning's promise made real again. In that humble frying pan, yesterday's meal became tomorrow's strength. The smell alone spoke of care, of families that found pride in making enough from little. It was food that didn't ask for praise, only gratitude, a quiet lesson in how to live with grace, grit, and a cast-iron skillet. Macaroni and tomato casserole was a true budget hero, filling plates and hearts with nothing more than pasta, stewed tomatoes, and a dusting of cheese. Elbow macaroni boiled in giant pots before being folded into a thick tomato sauce seasoned with onions and a touch of pepper. A light sprinkle of grated cheddar melted into a gentle crust during baking, sealing in the comforting aroma. When the lunch bell rang, the scent of tomatoes and cheese floated through hallways, drawing students with its homestyle promise. Each bite brought the tender chew of macaroni and the sweet tang of slow-cooked tomatoes, a combination that felt both hearty and familiar. Children returned for seconds, not because it was fancy, but because it was filling and warm on cold days. Macaroni and tomato casserole turned simple ingredients into a meal that carried students through the longest afternoons and remains a beloved memory of uncomplicated cafeteria fare. Quick skillet tamale pie was the shortcut lunch that showed up in nearly every old cookbook under hearty fast meals. You browned some ground beef, poured in canned chili, sprinkled crushed corn chips over the top, and finished it off with shredded cheese. It was fast, filling, and about as close to homemade comfort food as you could get when groceries were scarce and the clock was ticking. Moms loved it because the ingredients were cheap, and kids devoured it because it was spicy, cheesy, and crunchy all at once. Some folks tossed on sour cream or salsa to dress it up, but most families stuck with the basics when money was tight. It was not authentic tamale pie, but nobody cared. It hit the spot, fed the family, and came together in under 10 minutes. You could find this recipe scribbled in old notepads, passed down from neighbors, or tucked into faded cookbooks that promised fast, filling lunches for busy days. So we're not done with the toasts just yet. Pork and beans on buttered toast was arguably the lifeblood of 1960s frugal eating. It was a simple and cheap meal that was very popular even from the 1940s, and while baked beans on toast was something that people always associated with New England and immigrant cuisine, baked beans on toast actually became something that Americans took very fondly to. It was thanks to the act of mixing canned pork and beans in there, and these beans would already be seasoned and sweetened. Thank you, Campbell's. This dish was something you would see in mining communities really often. You would also see them in mill towns. You didn't need any sort of prep work for this dish whatsoever. All you had to do was just pop open the can and heat it up. You could make a sandwich out of it too, or you could have it as a side to some stew and dip it in. People ate very different and interesting things back then, not just to keep everything according to budget, but also so that things would just taste better, be healthier, you know? People really used to treat their food like fuel back in the day. Also, some tartar sauce would turn this into a 5-star work meal. Savory oatcakes are as rustic of a snack as they come, but they're also a warm hug when it's your lunch break, and you can only think of how badly you miss home. Made with oats, flour, butter, salt, and water, these flat round cakes were the difference between powering through that last hour at work and handing in your notice period sometimes. You can either bake these or cook them on a griddle, but the end result is usually a chewy, dense, nutty oatcake with a hint of rich butteriness. Sometimes these would be made with herbs and cheese for extra flavor, but the classic oatcake was always something that was simple because it needed to be. Savory oatcakes were something you would see a lot in New England thanks to British immigrants, but they spread from there to almost every part of America in the 20th century. Roasted chestnuts and salt were something that was as cozy as it got. Peanut butter and honey sandwiches delivered pure, sticky joy that somehow satisfied federal nutrition guidelines while still feeling like a treat. Thick slices of white bread were spread edge to edge with creamy peanut butter, then drizzled with golden honey that soaked slowly into the crumb. When pressed together, the sandwich oozed sweetness with every bite, leaving fingers gleaming and napkins useless. Paired with a small carton of milk and a crisp apple, it offered both protein and energy for the playground ahead. Children loved the chewy contrast of salty peanut butter and smooth honey, a flavor combination that made even dull afternoons feel a little brighter. Lunchroom chatter often paused for the satisfying pull of honey between bites, a small moment of collective delight. Simple, inexpensive, and universally adored, this sandwich remains a memory of childhood that no packaged snack has ever replaced. Leftover meatloaf sandwiches with ketchup were the reliable lunches that showed up in fridges across America the day after dinner. You sliced cold meatloaf thin, layered it onto soft sandwich bread, added a squirt of ketchup, and called it done. It was fast, filling, and made sure that last night's dinner stretched just a little further. Meatloaf itself was all about using affordable ingredients, ground beef, breadcrumbs, eggs, and stretching them into a meal for the whole family. Turning leftovers into sandwiches was the next logical step, and it worked. You got a hearty, savory lunch ready in under 10 minutes with barely any effort. Old cookbooks loved suggesting it, lunchboxes were packed with it, and kids grew up knowing exactly what was coming after meatloaf night. You could add cheese or lettuce if you had them, but most families kept it plain with just meatloaf and ketchup. It might not sound glamorous now, but back then it was the fast, frugal lunch that kept families fed and made every bit of dinner count. Potted meat and cracker stackers were the quiet heroes of pantry survival. A small tin of potted meat, salty, smooth, and heavily seasoned, was the kind of staple that didn't spoil and never complained. Paired with plain soda crackers, it became a full meal in minutes, eaten on break room benches or the back of trucks. Some spread it thick like sandwich filling. Others scooped it straight from the can. It wasn't fancy, but it filled the belly and steadied the hands for another long day. Factory workers, students, and traveling salesmen all trusted it when fresh food was out of reach. A slice of onion, a dab of mustard, or a splash of hot sauce could turn it almost gourmet. Cheap, convenient, and long-lasting potted meat was a small insurance policy against hunger. It tasted of salt, smoke, and persistence, the flavor of getting by when times were lean. Those little cans represented ingenuity as much as necessity, proving that even the simplest food could stand as a symbol of endurance. Mock pizza squares brought the excitement of pizza day even when budgets were tight, using thick bread dough, a smear of tomato sauce, and a generous layer of government cheese. Baked until the cheese bubbled and browned, these squares were cut into neat rectangles that fit perfectly on cafeteria trays. The scent of oregano and melting cheese drifted through the building, sparking cheers from students who knew a treat was coming. Each bite offered the chewy crust, sweet sauce, and gooey cheese that satisfied cravings without needing a pizzeria. Children often compared their slices, searching for the piece with the most browned edges or extra sauce. Lunch staff appreciated how easily the big pans could feed hundreds while still creating excitement. Mock pizza squares captured the joy of a special lunch, proving that even the simplest version of pizza could brighten a school day and leave a lasting impression of warm cheese and happy chatter. Cracker Stack lunches were the shortcut every lunchbox kid quietly loved, and every parent threw together when time was short. You took Ritz crackers, layered slices of American cheese between them, and tossed in some apple slices on the side. It was simple, salty, and filled you up without needing to cook a thing. Old lunchbox guides always had this one listed because it hit that sweet spot between easy, affordable, and kid-friendly. Some folks swapped in peanut butter or ham, but the classic cheese and cracker combo stuck around the longest. It was not gourmet, but it got the job done. Quick, portable, and ready before the bus pulled up. It sounds basic now, but for families juggling busy mornings and tight grocery budgets, Cracker Stacks were a reliable lunch that needed zero effort to pull off. Peanut butter and banana roll-ups are way better than you might think. Despite the seemingly bad impression they make in your head, these are the perfect harmony of savory peanut butter and sweet, sweet banana. Also, it works both ways. If you don't like the texture of bananas because they're very mushy, then you'll enjoy this because more peanut butter actually makes it resemble a custard. If you're already a fan, then you'll find that the sweet richness only makes this much better. So most of the time in the 60s, people used to use flattened tortilla bread for this. Now, some people like to toast theirs, but that kind of goes against the vibe of the dessert in my opinion. How do you feel about it? Also, people were very often using this as a breakfast. It worked too. As far as breakfasts go, this is easily the most ideal one, because it gives you enough energy to last through an entire day. Some people preferred to have this in smoothie form though, but that wasn't nearly as effective as making a sandwich. Think about it. What do you get with maybe 2 sandwiches using the same amount you did for the milkshake? Exactly. And you get milk on the side? Who's ever complained about that? Besides, weird people that don't like milk. Pinto bean patties turned humble leftovers into something hearty enough to carry through a day's labor. When supper's beans cooled on the stove, the next morning they would be mashed, mixed with cornmeal or flour, and fried into small cakes. Crisp on the outside, soft inside, they held together just enough to slide between slices of bread for an easy sandwich. Cold or warm, it did not matter. They tasted like thrift and care, proof that nothing in a hillbilly kitchen ever went to waste. You could spice them if you had the means, but even plain, they had a comfort all their own. Some said the flavor deepened overnight, as if the beans remembered the smoke from last night's fire. These patties were food for people who understood how to make plenty out of scraps, and they did it with pride. A jar of pickles on the side turned it into a full meal, simple but whole, just like the folks who made it. Vegetable beef soup with crackers was the ultimate winter warmer, simmered slowly until every ingredient reached perfect tenderness. Chunks of beef mingled with carrots, potatoes, celery, and peas in a rich broth that filled the entire building with a savory aroma. Students arriving from chilly playgrounds found instant comfort in the steam rising from their bowls. The saltines served alongside were ideal for crumbling into the soup or munching separately, adding a welcome crunch. Each spoonful delivered a balance of hearty meat and vegetables, making it both filling and nourishing. Teachers favored it for its balanced nutrition and ability to quiet a noisy cafeteria, as everyone savored the hot meal. For many children, this soup became a benchmark of homemade flavor, despite being prepared in massive school kitchen kettles. Vegetable beef soup with crackers demonstrated how simple ingredients, cooked patiently, could create a meal that felt like home and turned an ordinary school lunch into something far more satisfying. Quick bologna slaw sandwiches were the shortcut lunch that turned cheap deli meat and leftover dressing into something filling in almost no time. You chopped up slices of bologna, mixed them with coleslaw dressing, usually that creamy, tangy kind, and spooned the whole mixture onto soft sandwich buns. That was lunch, ready in under 10 minutes and surprisingly satisfying. This quirky little meal showed up all over Southern quick lunch cookbooks and school cafeteria menus because it was fast, affordable, and made the most of what you had on hand. Bologna was the lunch meat that never seemed to run out, and coleslaw dressing lived in the fridge way longer than you expected. Some folks added shredded cabbage or onions to stretch it further, but most kept it simple with just bologna, creamy dressing, and a soft bun. It might not sound gourmet, but when the clock was ticking and grocery money was tight, these salty, creamy sandwiches were a lifesaver. You would find the recipe scribbled on old index cards, passed around at potlucks, or tucked inside faded community cookbooks that promised quick meals when time and energy were both running low. Macaroni and tomato soup bakes were an easy-to-handle casserole that was extremely hot in the working-class communities throughout the middle half of the 20th century. This was a dish that took elbow macaroni with canned tomato soup, and it was almost always Campbell's. A few more pantry staple ingredients would ensure an inexpensive and wonderful meal that maybe the kids would take a few rounds getting used to. For the adults, though, it was the best way to have comfort food on a budget besides potatoes. All you needed was cheese, milk, and eggs if they were available, but even without these, the dish could still be made. It just would not be as thick, rich, or as flavorful. The best part about this was that all you had to actually do was just boil the pasta and you would be set for the entire day. This could include bits of ground beef, bacon, or ham, whatever kind of protein is your choice really. But it could also be made creamy and with just aromatics and herbs. There was a lot of versatility with this bake, and that's because it was so simple. It made for a very flexible dish that could fit a lot of people's preferences easily, with almost none of the fuss you normally associate with homemade pasta dishes. This is so easy, even your teenagers could pick it up, really. Spam fritters are also pretty much exactly what you think aren't. They sound like a cutesy dish your wife whips up for you before you come home. But this is actually a wartime dish through and through. Thick slices of canned Spam dipped in batter and then deep fried until they're gloriously golden, pure fish and chip style. The outside is as crunchy and hot as you would expect, and the inside is tender, slightly salty and addictively chewy in the way only Spam can be. The flavor is literally just comfort food. It's slightly smoky, the perfect amount of meaty without being overwhelming, and it balances out with the salty notes. This is a dish that makes no apologies and instead chooses to embrace its greasy nature to give you a taste of nostalgia wherever you are. Spam fritters were something that exploded in popularity during World War II, and meat rationing was still a massive thing. Spam, courtesy of American Lend-Lease supplies, started to become what people were relying on because of how easy it was to work with. It was the working-class answer to the age-old question of, how do we make canned meat something that feels like a proper meal? And Spam fritters stuck around even after the war, too, especially in towns where factory work was a lot more common than any other kind of job. Hey, you might not be fighting a war anymore, but that 9 to 5 is still no joke. Cold biscuit sandwiches with molasses or fatback were the kind of lunch that got a man through a 12-hour day with nothing but grit and habit to lean on. The biscuits were always cold by the time the tin lunch pail opened, but that did not matter much. If there was molasses in the pantry, you spread it thick for sweetness. If there was only fatback, you tucked in a slice or two for salt and smoke. The biscuits themselves were usually baked from leftover dough at dawn, made tough enough to hold together through a morning in a jacket pocket. By noon, the edges had gone soft, and the smell of lard or syrup made the whole meal feel like home. These sandwiches were a bridge between the breakfast table and the next hard stretch of fieldwork, something made from what little you had but worth every bite. Each one carried a taste of someone's kitchen. And even in its plainness, it was love in its simplest form, wrapped in wax paper and patience. Sloppy Joe on buttered bun was the undisputed king of the 1960s cafeteria, a messy mix of sweet tomato sauce and crumbled ground beef piled high on a soft white bun that never stood a chance. The sauce soaked into the bread until it reached that perfect level of soggy where every bite dripped down your fingers and the cafeteria napkins were never strong enough to help. The smell of simmering beef and tangy ketchup filled hallways before the lunch bell even rang, making the line for this sandwich stretch past the milk cooler. Children loved it because it was warm, filling, and just a little rebellious, a meal that made a delightful mess when you were supposed to be neat. Teachers braced themselves for stained shirts and sticky desks, but rarely complained because everyone wanted one too. It was a dish that tasted like pure fun, and its rich sauce still lingers in memory long after the last cafeteria tray was cleared. Creamed corn and egg skillet was one of those weirdly satisfying lunches that showed up when the fridge was nearly empty and time was running short. You would grab a can of creamed corn, crack in a few eggs, and fry everything together in one pan. It sounds questionable now, but for families back then, it was warm, savory, and fast. Ready in minutes when kids came home hungry or dad's lunch break was short. It usually got served with plain white toast or leftover biscuits, soaking up every last bit of that creamy, buttery mess. Some folks added black pepper or a sprinkle of shredded cheese, but most kept it plain because that is what was in the cupboard. It was not glamorous, and nobody was putting this on a restaurant menu, but in old cookbooks it was listed right next to the hearty quick meals section. That is how you knew it worked. Navy bean loaves are pretty much exactly what you think they are. Want the comfort of a baked loaf along with all the benefits and muscle building of 3 different kinds of beans? You've found the right recipe. This loaf was a budget-friendly, meatless meal that became popular among the working class and people who were trying to cut down on how much meat they were eating. Growing health concerns really made people turn to dishes like this more and more often because they were realizing that they couldn't afford, financially, physically, or mentally, several health scares per year just because of higher cholesterol or something. Bean loaves were something that were synonymous with being a clean, healthy dish. They were also very filling, and they would go around a family of 4 pretty easily. Beans were a great source of fiber, not just protein, so they also made you full for longer. You could literally just mash and blend them into a thick paste. You could also leave a few chunks in there for a better bite, and then you would just need breadcrumbs and crackers to bind everything together. Pour in some eggs for a better shape, and throw it in the oven. We're going to start our list off with a plowman's lunch, which is actually a dish best served cold. This little work of art features a lot of sharp cheddar cheese, which definitely makes it a hit with fans of dairy. The next thing that makes a plowman's lunch so zesty and flavorful is pickled onions and a good layer of Branston pickles for safe measuring. Now all you need is some crusty bread and some hard-boiled eggs, and you pretty much have lunch served. It was more common for people to take things like cold cuts of meat, pork pies, or an apple slice for some variety in the food, but eggs were the one thing you would see non-stop with this dish. It's a pretty well-balanced blend of different flavors. You have a nice little vinegary tang from the pickles, but it doesn't get overwhelming thanks to the cheese helping to cut through all that. Eventually, the cheese mixes really well with the bread, and after it sets and coats the pickles in there, you get an incredibly delicious meal. This was a meal right out of the 50s and 60s, and funnily enough, this was something that was marketed by the Cheese Bureau in Britain so that cheese sales could go up a lot. Cornbread and buttermilk in a jar was one of those hill country meals that told you everything about the people who made it. It was called a liquid lunch, though there was nothing fancy or store-bought about it. Crumbled cornbread went into a glass jar, and then cold buttermilk was poured over it until it soaked every crumb. On hot days, that jar came straight from a springhouse or well bucket, cool enough to wake a man right up. You would shake it, maybe add a pinch of salt, and drink it thick like a meal. It was cheap, simple, and almost impossible to ruin, which is exactly why it became a favorite among farmers, mill hands, and anyone working under the sun. Some swore it was better than anything cooked fresh because it filled your belly without slowing your body down. It might not look like much, but that mixture of tangy milk and gritty bread was the South's version of endurance, comfort disguised as thrift. Creamed turkey over mashed potatoes brought a taste of holiday leftovers into an ordinary school day. Chunks of tender turkey simmered in a silky white sauce until every piece was coated in rich gravy. Scooped generously over a mound of buttery mashed potatoes, it was the kind of lunch that filled stomachs and soothed spirits in the middle of math class. The aroma of roasting poultry and warm milk gravy floated down the halls, calling every student like a quiet invitation. Even those who claimed they were not hungry somehow found room for seconds when the lunch lady offered. The sauce pooled at the edges of the tray, perfect for sopping up with the soft dinner roll that always came alongside. It felt like a small feast, a comforting reminder of family dinners even on a gray school afternoon. Many still remember that first spoonful melting across potatoes, a warm hug on a chilly day that no modern cafeteria menu can match. Cottage cheese and canned peach plates were the no-cook lunch that showed up every time the stove was off limits or the heat outside was too much to bear. You scooped a mound of cottage cheese onto your plate, opened a can of peach halves, arranged them neatly, and called it lunch. Maybe you added a lettuce leaf underneath to make it look fancy, but nobody was fooling themselves. It was all about speed and simplicity. Diet cookbooks from the 1970s praised this plate as a light, protein-packed option that took barely 5 minutes to make. It was weirdly filling, cold, and refreshing, especially when summer kitchens felt like ovens. You could spot this combo everywhere, from lunch counters to school cafeterias, with old diner menus proudly listing it as the fruit and cottage cheese plate. Roasting chestnuts doesn't just bring out that sweet, nutty flavor that's so abundant in them. It also brings back warm memories of family picnics, vibes of home and comfort, and just the kind of atmosphere that can put you to sleep pretty quickly. When they're dusted with a little bit of salt, it makes this balance of savory and sweet that becomes borderline addictive. The chestnuts get a bit crispy once you begin to roast them, but the inside goes through a completely different transformation. This actually starts to soften, and it almost gets to a creamy point. It's almost like a natural candy, which is insane. You can also crack the outer shell and scoop up the creamy inside if you want to eat it that way. The history of roasted chestnuts is something that's deeply steeped in tradition too. They've been something of a staple in our country for a long time, dating back to the time of Native American tribes who would rely on foraging to get their daily sustenance. They're also something that has always been very popular during the winter season because, well, do I need to explain this? Obviously, you want a roasted something during winter, and what better something than a refreshing, crispy chestnut? Vinegar pie slices were a forgotten miracle of thrift, bright, tangy, and sweet all at once. When lemons were scarce and fresh fruit out of reach, mountain cooks made do with vinegar, sugar, and eggs to create something that tasted every bit as fine. The filling baked into a glossy custard with a soft, buttery crust that held its shape even in the summer heat. It needed no refrigeration, no fancy ingredients, just patience and a steady hand. Wrapped in wax paper or newspaper, slices went into lunch pails beside coffee jars and biscuits. The first bite was sharp and surprising, but by the second, the vinegar's sting mellowed into a warm, caramel-like sweetness. It was a pie that aged gracefully, growing richer over time, a small reward for those who worked hard and wasted nothing. It became a staple of mountain kitchens, a quiet symbol of resourceful living. What began as imitation lemon pie turned into something uniquely its own, humble yet elegant in its simplicity. Vinegar pie proved that flavor could come from imagination, not luxury, and that even in lean years, sweetness could still find its way to the table and make life a little softer. Baked custard cups ended many school lunches on a sweet, silky note, a dessert that felt both wholesome and indulgent. Eggs, milk, and sugar were whisked together and poured into small metal cups, then baked gently until set with a delicate golden top. Served chilled or at room temperature, the custard was smooth and lightly sweet, a perfect contrast to savory main dishes. Students relished the creamy texture, savoring each spoonful as the final reward of the meal. The faint scent of vanilla lingered in the air, promising comfort before the return to afternoon lessons. Teachers approved because it provided protein and calcium, while children simply enjoyed a dessert that felt like something from a family kitchen. Baked custard cups remain a symbol of simple pleasures, a reminder of how even modest ingredients can create a treat worth remembering. They brought a touch of elegance to the 1960s cafeteria, closing the meal with quiet satisfaction that still lingers in memory today. Rice and egg bowls with soy sauce were the thrift store cookbook lunch that turned leftovers into something hot, salty, and satisfying in minutes. You grabbed leftover rice, tossed it in a pan, cracked in an egg, scrambled everything together, and finished with a dash of soy sauce. It was quick, filling, and one of the smartest ways to stretch pantry basics into lunch. Old, thrifty meal guides loved this recipe because it used stuff already sitting in your fridge and came together in under 10 minutes. Some folks added chopped scallions or a little sesame oil, but the classic stayed simple: rice, egg, and soy sauce, fried up fast. It was a go-to for busy parents, college students, or anyone making do with leftovers and a tight grocery budget. The rice got crispy around the edges, the egg brought protein, and the soy sauce pulled it all together. It might not win awards for presentation, but it filled you up and tasted good when you needed a cheap, fast lunch. The fun part about these is that they actually come from African American communities, and if you ever have the fortune of trying an authentic one from a Black mom, you really shouldn't pass up the opportunity. Cold fish cakes are something you would never miss out on whenever you would visit any kind of coastal town. They were the product of combining flaked cooked fish, which was often just cod and haddock, with mashed potatoes, herbs, and different kinds of spice blends and rubs. Then, people would shape the fish meat into patties and fry them, giving you some high-class maritime comfort food. The char of cold fish cakes came from the fact that once you let them chill and cool down, they became even nicer. That's because the fish started to become firmer once it cooled down, and that meant the crispy outer shell as well, so that first bite was honestly addictive. Despite being such a fun dish, they have a pretty serious origin story. These were a popular leftover dish in both America and Britain, and pairing fish with potatoes was a budget-friendly way to stretch what you had in the pantry while getting a proper, healthy meal in. Souse meat or head cheese sandwiches were relics of an age before refrigeration, when nothing went to waste. Pig heads were boiled until tender, the meat stripped from the bone and mixed with vinegar, salt, pepper, and spice. The mixture was then pressed into a loaf and cooled until firm, forming a savory jelly that sliced cleanly. Packed between bread, it became a tangy, meaty sandwich that traveled well and kept for days without spoiling. It was food born of necessity but perfected through care, each loaf representing thrift, labor, and skill. Families made it during butchering season, stretching one hog across weeks of meals. The vinegar kept it safe, the seasoning made it shine, and the flavor told of a people who refused to waste what life gave. To some, it was an acquired taste. To others, it was comfort, rich and familiar. Cold, salty, and satisfying, it was a worker's protein long before canned meats existed. Souse meat carried both history and heart, a living memory of a time when survival and ingenuity shared the same kitchen table. Creamed spinach over rice was the cafeteria's answer to the call for healthier lunches, pairing leafy greens with a mild, creamy sauce poured over fluffy rice. Fresh or frozen spinach was simmered with milk and a touch of butter until velvety, then ladled onto warm rice that absorbed the flavorful mixture. The vibrant green against the white rice made a cheerful sight on plastic trays. Teachers praised it as a powerhouse of vitamins, while children learned to enjoy spinach in a gentle, comforting form. The aroma of warm cream and earthy greens filled the air, and the first bite delivered a subtle sweetness that surprised many students. It was a dish that balanced nourishment with simplicity, offering a welcome break from heavier meals without ever feeling bland. Creamed spinach over rice proved that healthy food could still taste indulgent when treated with care, and remains a quiet favorite in the memories of those who experienced it. Cheese Dreams were the open-faced, melty sandwiches that turned plain old white bread into lunch in under 10 minutes. You laid out a slice of bread, topped it with American cheese, and stuck it under the broiler until bubbly and browned. If you had extras lying around, you could throw on a tomato slice or a strip of bacon, but most folks kept it simple. Cheese Dreams popped up in every old-school cookbook as a lifesaver for hungry kids, rushed workdays or weekends when grocery shopping had not happened yet. It was one of those lunches that made the most of cheap pantry basics, but still felt warm and filling. The cheese bubbled up golden and gooey, the edges of the bread crisped up just enough, and lunch was done before you even had time to set the table. Families loved it because it tasted good, cost next to nothing, and required zero effort. It was one of those old-fashioned meals that looked like a shortcut but stuck around because it simply worked when time and money were both tight. Egg salad and olive sandwiches were also one of the best combinations people had when times were tough. Around the end of the month, when your pay would be finishing up and you were stretching the last of your groceries, it was very common for people to make this for breakfast. It was really easy to elevate a simple sandwich into something more delicious thanks to this combination, and it got very popular in church fundraiser cookbooks. You would also see this on school cafeteria menus, and it was a really popular choice for picnics and potlucks too. For a humble sandwich that's just egg salad and olives, it definitely got around. This sandwich worked amazingly well as a packable lunch you could take with you or as a quick little family meal. Eggs were still not too expensive for most people, so working-class families relied on them as much as they could. 1 or 2 eggs was enough for the dish if you were being modest, and if you had some sauces to throw on top, then that would be even better. Fried bologna and egg on white bread was the classic taste of mill towns and working shifts that never seemed to end. Bologna, cheap and salty, was sliced and fried until its edges curled like little cups, sizzling in a skillet still warm from the morning coffee. An egg followed, fried in the same grease, yolk soft enough to run just a bit, and together they met between 2 slices of plain white bread. The sandwich was hot, messy, and deeply satisfying. It could be eaten in 2 minutes before the whistle blew, or packed away and still taste good hours later. For many, the smell of frying bologna was the sound of morning itself, cutting through factory clatter and early fog. It was working food, quick, hearty, and honest, made for people who didn't have time to waste but still wanted something that felt whole. Even cold by lunchtime, it carried that same smoky bite and sense of endurance. It wasn't elegant, but it was loyal, like the hands that made it every dawn. It fed the hunger that came from effort, not luxury, and left behind the comfort of something earned. Milk carton surprise flavors gave students a reason to rush the lunch line, as seasonal choices like chocolate, strawberry, or even orange milk appeared without warning. The familiar waxed paper cartons held an element of mystery that turned a routine drink into an exciting moment. Children eagerly checked the crates, hoping to snag a favorite flavor before supplies ran out. The sweet scent of strawberry or the unexpected citrus of orange transformed the standard midday beverage into a treat worth talking about all afternoon. Teachers enjoyed the calm that followed as students happily sipped their chilled drinks. The cool, creamy texture offered comfort, whether paired with sandwiches or hot meals, making every surprise flavor a small celebration. These occasional twists turned milk into a conversation starter and gave each lunch a hint of fun. Milk carton surprise flavors remain a beloved memory of 1960s cafeterias, proof that even the simplest change can brighten a school day. Now, as far as cold and chilled dishes go, a salad is something people can cope with, but cold roasted beef with horseradish sauce? By God, it's almost blasphemy. Really? Cold beef? You ever heard of that? It was a shock to me too. I think most of us have just grown up assuming all meat-related dishes are supposed to be served hot by default, you know? It was these thin slices of roast beef that were packed in a dipping sauce, but it was still something to get used to. Now, I'm not really sure what the idea was behind this. I guess it is true that microwaves weren't exactly a function of everyone's homes, and lots of sandwiches would just go cold. If you eat enough of those, it can definitely develop into like a habit, but to have this as a preference? Chat, I'm just not sure how I feel about this one. What would you guys think? If you give it a yes, I'm taking this to work tomorrow, so just think with caution, okay? That lunch break is really important. Zucchini fritters from leftovers were the garden surplus lunch that turned backyard vegetables into something hot, crispy, and filling when you had more zucchini than you knew what to do with. You grated up those extra zucchinis, mixed them with flour, eggs, and a little seasoning, then pan-fried them until golden brown. It was quick, cheap, and showed up in nearly every Use Your Garden Haul cookbook from the 1970s. Backyard gardens always seemed to over-deliver on zucchini, and fritters were a fast, satisfying way to keep all that produce from going to waste. They crisped up around the edges, stayed soft in the center, and felt just hearty enough to pass for lunch. Some families added shredded cheese, herbs, or breadcrumbs to stretch them further, but most kept it simple with just the basics. It was frugal, filling, and practical, a classic example of how families made the most of what they grew. It might not have been exciting, but zucchini fritters worked hard to keep plates full and grocery spending low. Creamed chipped ham sandwiches were a Pittsburgh favorite that made their way onto 1960s school menus, bringing savory comfort to cold afternoons. Finely minced ham was simmered in a creamy white sauce until thick and velvety, then spooned over soft hamburger buns that soaked up the rich gravy. The scent of smoky ham and warm milk sauce filled the cafeteria, promising a stick-to-your-ribs meal that could power students through the rest of the day. The mixture's salty-sweet balance made each bite a warm reminder of home cooking, and even those who were unsure at first found themselves scraping every last drop from the tray. Lunch ladies appreciated how easily the recipe could be stretched to feed hundreds while still tasting like a special treat. Creamed chipped ham sandwiches proved that simple ingredients, handled with care, could create a dish that was both practical and memorable, a lunchtime highlight that lingered in the minds of all who tasted it. Corn fritters with maple or sorghum drizzle were the kind of lunch that blurred the line between meal and treat. Fresh corn was grated or sliced straight from the cob, mixed with flour, egg, salt, and just enough milk to hold together. Each spoonful dropped into hot grease puffed into golden rounds, crisp on the edges and soft inside. Once fried, they were eaten right from the skillet or wrapped in paper for later, still sweet and fragrant. Coal miners, mill hands, and field workers prized them for their flavor and sturdiness. They kept well, filled the belly, and reminded folks of summer even in the dead of winter. If there was syrup, maple up north, sorghum down south, a drizzle turned them into something close to joy. Some paired them with beans or greens, others just coffee in a tin cup. The smell of frying corn was enough to lift spirits, a melody of popping grease and laughter. In every fritter lived the taste of home, of fields and patience, of hands that turned hunger into invention. It was a meal, a memory, and a small miracle all at once, showing that sweetness could survive even the hardest days. Poke salad and egg sandwiches were spring's first gift after a long winter's wait. When pokeweed shoots pushed through thawed soil, foragers gathered them young before bitterness set in. The leaves were boiled 3 times to wash away poison, then chopped, drained, and fried in bacon grease until dark and rich. Layered with slices of hard-boiled egg between bread, it became a hearty field lunch, fresh, filling, and full of life. The greens gave a wild tang that spoke of earth and rain, while the eggs brought comfort and weight. It was food born from patience and care, a reward for knowing the land well enough to take only what it offered. In the mountains, such meals weren't poor. They were proof that nature always paid back in flavor and grace. Turkey Tetrazzini squares offered a clever twist on a post-holiday classic, transforming leftover turkey and noodles into neat, sliceable portions. Creamy mushroom sauce coated strands of spaghetti and chunks of turkey, all baked until the top formed a delicate golden crust. Once cooled slightly, the pan was cut into perfect squares that held together just long enough to reach a tray. The rich aroma of garlic and cheese drifted through the lunchroom, giving every student hope that today's meal would taste like something from home. Children loved the way each bite combined tender turkey, creamy sauce, and chewy pasta in one satisfying mouthful. It was a dish that made leftovers feel like a celebration, proving that creativity and thrift could produce something special. Turkey tetrazzini squares are a delicious memory of a time when nothing was wasted, and every holiday bird found a second life in the school cafeteria. Pimiento cheese sandwiches on white bread were the Southern lunchbox staple that quietly made their way into kitchens across the country. You made up a big batch of pimiento cheese, usually shredded cheddar, mayo, and little diced pimiento peppers, then slapped it between slices of soft sandwich bread. That was lunch, fast and done. If you were lucky, the batch had been chilling in the fridge overnight so the flavors had time to settle. It showed up everywhere, from school cafeterias to Sunday church gatherings, and you did not need fancy ingredients to pull it together. The filling looked bright orange and odd to anyone who had never tried it, but it was creamy, sharp, and surprisingly satisfying. Some folks added extras like sliced pickles or lettuce, but the plain version stuck around because it was quick, cheap, and kept everyone fed when time was tight. Old cookbooks had pages of pimiento cheese variations, but the classic stayed the same: easy, portable, and just filling enough to get you through the day. Leftover spaghetti sandwiches were the oddball lunch that quietly stuck around in frugal kitchens long after most people thought they had disappeared. You grabbed cold spaghetti, sauce and all, layered it between slices of white bread, and toasted the whole thing in a skillet until golden and crisp. It sounds strange now, but back then, this was a smart way to stretch last night's dinner into something new without spending another dime. Families with growing kids loved this one because it was hearty, fast, and filled everyone up on the cheap. The bread got crispy, the spaghetti heated through, and suddenly leftovers did not seem so boring. Some folks added shredded cheese, extra sauce, or even a little garlic butter if they wanted to dress it up, but most kept it plain. You could find this recipe scribbled on old note cards, passed along at community potlucks, or tucked inside faded cookbooks under fast lunches or leftover meals. It was quirky, salty, and filling, which is probably why people kept making it even when their cupboards were nearly empty. Mock chicken legs were a working-class classic. It was a dish that was born out of the worst times of the Great Depression, and it was something that particularly shined in Rust Belt cities. It was incredibly popular among immigrant communities. So, there wasn't any actual chicken in this, but using grounded pork or even veal hoe chefs would shape the meat into the form of a drumstick. Pork was significantly cheaper than chicken, especially drumsticks, and since this was made out of round meat and relied on being shaped, even less desirable cuts could work for it. Some even used mixes of veal and pork, and others even went as far as to make their own vegetarian-based versions using mushrooms, mashed potatoes, and other vegetables. They were served alongside similar vegetables to make sure the dish was as hearty as it could be, and it was actually pretty okay for the time. It's not something that you would ever pick over an actual drumstick or something that people think really mimics the flavor too well, but for something that was made out of the most bare-bones ingredients, it was actually pretty okay. Even school children would be eating this, and church and funeral gatherings were often known to serve these as well whenever they could. One of the best things people did is that they also repurposed stale breading with this dish by using it for breadcrumbs. They would fry those in lard, and it would actually be pretty okay DIY fast food. You want to talk about some real comfort food? Nothing better than some fried potato cakes. These crispy little beauties are made with mashed potatoes that have been mixed with flour, butter, and sometimes a modest amount of your typical herbal seasonings like parsley, rosemary, and oregano. The trick, though, is pan-frying them. You really want to aim for that crispy, browned but slightly burnt crust that forms on the exterior, and how you handle the potato cakes really matters. Just flipping these in the pan won't do. You'll have to get good at frying those sides evenly too, so you get a very well-rounded bite. They became a staple of home cooking in the southern and midwestern areas, and they were also considered an almost perfect way to get rid of leftover mashed potatoes without them going to waste. It was a great way to turn yesterday's dinner into today's lunch, and they were also amazing for a work lunch because you could carry them in a simple box and eat them up very easily. This wasn't food that you had to cut and pick through, you could just dig in. The process was also really relaxing. something that was borderline therapeutic. You just take the mashed potatoes and begin mashing them into small patties, and then you get your skillet ready. They're still as popular today as they always were, but they're rarely what people take along for lunch to work now. Leftover biscuit and gravy cakes were born from a kitchen that refused to waste even a spoonful. When the morning sausage gravy thickened in the skillet and yesterday's biscuits went stale, someone clever mixed them together. The crumbs soaked in the drippings, turning soft and savory before being shaped into patties and fried crisp. What came out was something new, a hearty griddle cake, golden on the outside, creamy within. Eaten hot, they were a breakfast miracle. Eaten cold at noon, they were comfort on the go. Wrapped in wax paper, they stayed tender, tasting of salt, smoke, and satisfaction. A drizzle of sorghum or a spoon of jam could make them sweet, but most folks ate them plain, proud of their frugality. Every bite was a reminder that good food didn't need new ingredients, only imagination. Families who stretched every meal found a small victory in these cakes, proof that thrift could still be delicious. The scent of them frying filled the house with warmth and gratitude, carrying yesterday's effort straight into today's workday hunger. Vegetable jelly. O Salad was the cafeteria's attempt to make vegetables exciting, a shimmering lime green mold studded with shredded carrots or bits of cabbage that wobbled on every tray. At first glance, it looked like dessert, catching the light in a jewel-toned sparkle that promised sweetness. One bite revealed the curious mix of tangy gelatin and crisp vegetables, a flavor both strange and oddly refreshing. Teachers encouraged second helpings, claiming it was healthy, while students debated whether it belonged with the main course or beside the pudding. Some children loved the crunch of carrot against the sweet lime, while others quietly pushed it aside, mesmerized by its wobble. The memory of that cool, jiggling slice is unforgettable, a relic of a time when creativity ruled the cafeteria and no combination seemed too bold to try. Vegetable Jell-O salad remains one of the most distinctive and talked about curiosities of 1960s school lunches. Tomato soup with soda cracker crumble was the poor man's lunch that somehow managed to feel warm, filling, and familiar without draining your pantry. You heated up canned tomato soup on the stove, crushed soda crackers over the top, maybe added a little pepper, and lunch was done in under 10 minutes. It was cozy, simple, and showed up in almost every household because it used staples that were always around. Kids loved smashing the crackers into the bowl. Parents loved how it stretched one can of soup into something that could actually fill a belly. This was the lunch for snow days, sick days, or those afternoons when the fridge was bare and dinner still felt far away. The recipe popped up in every thrift store cookbook, always listed under quick meals or lunches for a crowd. Some families added milk or a pat of butter to make it richer, but most kept it plain and fast. It sounds basic now, but for families scraping by in the 1960s or 1970s, this little soup was a warm reminder that simple food could still get the job done. On the other hand, stuffed bell peppers were an American classic, especially in places like the South. The idea was really similar to the egg-stuffed salad tomatoes I was talking about. Even then, I told you how it's more or less like these bell peppers. The idea here this time was to hollow these peppers out and fill them in with things like rice, tomato sauce, and ground meat. They were also the perfect thing to take to work because you could carry them in just about anything. The more transportable something was, the better it would function as a work lunch. Stuffed bell peppers also had the extra effect of giving you a boost of energy, which was always really nice because desk jobs, as I'm sure all of you might be familiar with, can suck the soul out of you. The reason these were popular in the South is because it's arguably the home of stuffed peppers and all variants of them. Those people love their spice, man. And when you hear about boiled sausage and pickles, it's hard not to assume the worst. Do they really have nothing else going on there? Boiled sausage is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. Sausage that's been simmered for a while in water or a seasoned broth until it gets cooked through. And the most common kinds of sausages to use back in the 20th century were bratwurst or kielbasa. Honestly, I think that people just ate this because it was quick, filling, and easy to carry around, while being pretty cheap. They couldn't go wrong with something like this, but they definitely weren't bringing a smile to anyone's face with this either. It was one of those things that worked a lot better with an icy beer though, but I can definitely understand why this didn't make the cut throughout the ages. Field pea and ham salad was more than a side dish. It was a whole meal dressed in simplicity. Made from boiled field peas mixed with diced ham, onions, and a bright splash of vinegar, it was spooned into glass jars to last the week. The salad was eaten cold, often with cornbread, biscuits, or crackers, and it kept workers full through long afternoons. The vinegar acted like a preservative, keeping it fresh even without ice, perfect for tin pails and field lunches. Each jar told the story of frugality turned to comfort. Field peas grew where little else would, fixing nitrogen in the soil and feeding families at the same time. When mixed with ham scraps or drippings, they became both practical and indulgent in their own quiet way. It was peasant food that carried pride, a dish built from endurance and earth. Families relied on it through planting, harvest, and lean months between. Every spoonful tasted of patience, resilience, and gratitude for what the land gave back. In its humble way, it fed both hunger and hope, proving that survival could still be seasoned with grace. Egg and ketchup stir-fry over rice was the no-fuss pantry lunch that every family had in their back pocket when groceries were running low but bellies still needed filling. You cracked a couple of eggs into a pan, scrambled them up with a little oil, added a squirt of ketchup, and poured the whole thing over leftover rice. That was it. Done in under 10 minutes, salty, tangy, and surprisingly satisfying for something so simple. Kids loved it because it tasted like breakfast and lunch at the same time, with just enough of that sweet ketchup kick to keep things interesting. Parents leaned on it because it used what they already had in the kitchen. Eggs, rice, and ketchup were always hanging around. Some families added soy sauce, scallions, or even a slice of processed cheese to stretch it further, but most kept it basic and fast. You could find this recipe scribbled in lunch guides, tucked inside old homemaker cookbooks, or passed along by neighbors who knew how to stretch leftovers into a real meal. It was not fancy, but it filled you up when time and money were tight. On the other hand, stuffed bell peppers were an American classic, especially in places like the South. The idea was really similar to the egg-stuffed salad tomatoes I was talking about. Even then, I told you how it's more or less like these bell peppers. The idea here this time was to hollow these peppers out and fill them in with things like rice, tomato sauce, and ground meat. They were also the perfect thing to take to work because you could carry them in just about anything. The more transportable something was, the better it would function as a work lunch. Stuffed bell peppers also had the extra effect of giving you a boost of energy, which was always really nice because desk jobs, as I'm sure all of you might be familiar with, can suck the soul out of you. The reason these were popular in the South is because it's arguably the home of stuffed peppers and all variants of them. Those people love their spice, man. To be honest, same deal with corned beef and cabbage wraps. The thing with sandwiches is that, as good as they were, most people really were trying to get onto that health parade that was taking over. It wasn't just a trend or a niche movement you'd only find in states that voted blue. It was something even the anti-vaxxers were getting behind, and if you can get those people to think about their health, you know we're either at rock bottom or approaching it. Corned beef and cabbage wraps were supposed to be familiar ground, while also being healthy enough that you could eat them every day. Plus, lots of people had grown pretty accustomed to eating cabbage thanks to victory gardens, which were just makeshift gardens you would have in your backyard during the Depression and grow crops out of. These were actually really good too. And with canned corned beef becoming a widespread item in most stores, it was only easier to make at home. Even someone who couldn't cook could just make and assemble this on their own. Pickled egg and bread is one of those old-school snacks that kind of raises an eyebrow when you first hear about it, but once you try it, you actually end up firmly seated on the bandwagon. It's exactly what the description on the tin says too. It's a pickled egg, usually drowning in vinegar and different kinds of tangy complementary spices, with a slice of plain buttered bread or a soft roll. No fancy layering, no Worcestershire sauce or anything, just the classic sharp punch of a pickle, balanced by the familiar, comforting tastes of egg and bread. Flavor-wise, this is a full-on vibe. The egg has a really nice texture that goes wonderfully with the pickles, and the acidic kick from the pickled brine really helps to contrast with the richness of the yolk of the egg. You take that, mix in some warm buttered bread, and you get yourself a meal that's the whole package. Creamy, soft, chewy, sharp, tangy, and whatever other flavor profile you can guess in your head. Pickled eggs are actually something that you'd find in New England more than anywhere else in America, but they've always been something of a working-class classic. Liverwurst and onion sandwiches were a really straightforward dish. There wasn't a lot going on here, and it was really just a 3-ingredient dish. Finally, we're going to back sandwiches we can actually recognize and digest. Who has their stuff cold? Not me. Liverwurst and onion sandwiches luckily aren't exactly things you serve cold either. This is a dish best served piping hot. See, liverwurst in itself is just a sausage that's been made with liver and some other parts of meat. Then you take in some raw onions and sauté them, serve them between slices of toasted bread with cheese, and there you go. Liverwurst is something we got from European and German communities, and it was really popular in areas like Detroit and Pennsylvania, where there were strong populations of European communities. Liverwurst was typically always blended with warm spices like allspice and nutmeg too, so you could either make it into this flavorful pâté or slice it and layer it with other kinds of things as well as cheese, of course. It's something that just faded out of relevance, though. It wasn't bad or impractical, but I guess it was a little too simple. Cabbage and hot dog stir-fry was the skillet lunch that popped up in every budget cookbook from the 1970s, and it stuck around because it worked. You chopped cabbage, sliced up hot dogs, threw them in a hot pan with a little oil, and stir-fried the whole thing until crispy and tender. It was salty, smoky, crunchy, and came together in under 10 minutes. This recipe lived in frugal households, school cafeterias, and quick lunch guides because it used the cheapest ingredients possible and still filled you up. Cabbage was a go-to vegetable for stretching meals, and hot dogs were always around because they lasted forever in the fridge. Toss them together, add a little pepper or hot sauce, and lunch was ready fast. Some folks added onions or garlic, but most kept it simple, just cabbage and hot dogs sizzling in the pan. It was not fancy, but it was reliable, warm, and made sure nothing went to waste when groceries were tight. Ham and scalloped potatoes delivered a creamy, savory combination that tasted like a holiday dinner served at midday. Thinly sliced potatoes were layered with diced ham and onions, then covered in a rich milk sauce before baking until bubbly and golden on top. The scent of smoky ham and buttery potatoes spread through the school corridors, drawing students forward with eager anticipation. Each forkful blended tender potatoes and salty ham with just enough sauce to coat every bite. Lunch ladies served generous squares that stayed warm and satisfying, a perfect answer to chilly days. Children savored the way the flavors melded, making it one of the most requested meals on the monthly menu. Ham and scalloped potatoes showed how school kitchens turned simple ingredients into comfort food that could rival any family recipe, leaving a memory of creamy richness that endures in the minds of those who tasted it. Peanut butter and banana biscuits were the sweet salvation of lean years, tasting like dessert when money was tight. Ripe bananas were mashed smooth and spread over thick peanut butter, then sandwiched inside soft, flaky biscuits instead of bread. It was sweet, hearty, and rich, without a pinch of sugar added. The mix stuck to your ribs and filled your spirit, keeping both kids and field hands steady through long days. Bananas were a treasure when they appeared, often bruised and discounted, but none ever went to waste. Combined with peanut butter, a cheap protein that never spoiled, they became a working lunch with soul. The taste was warm and familiar, blending comfort and cleverness in every bite. School children unwrapped them with smiles, and grown folks took them to fields or mills, knowing it would last till dusk. It was mountain ingenuity wrapped in wax paper, proof that the simplest pairings could turn survival into satisfaction. In the heart of hardship, that biscuit sandwich shone as quiet joy, proof that love, thrift, and a little sweetness could still fill the table and the heart alike. Spanish rice bake turned simple pantry staples into something unexpectedly satisfying. Rice was simmered with diced tomatoes, mild chili powder, ground beef, and chopped bell peppers before being baked in massive steel pans until the flavors melded together. When the trays were pulled from the oven, the smell of spiced tomatoes and peppers filled the cafeteria, carrying a hint of excitement down the lunch line. A light sprinkle of grated cheese browned on top added just enough richness to make every bite rewarding. Students liked how the rice stayed fluffy, yet soaked up the seasoned tomato sauce, each forkful offering a gentle warmth rather than strong heat. It was hearty enough to keep bellies full through afternoon classes, yet mild enough to please even the pickiest eaters. Spanish rice bake may not have been flashy, but it was dependable and deeply comforting. A dish that turned a cold day into something memorable with nothing more than rice, tomatoes, and a little school lunch magic. It never made the cover of fancy food magazines, but it kept showing up where it mattered, on busy lunch tables when time was short. Spam and pickle sandwiches were one of those salty, tangy lunches you could whip together before the coffee even finished brewing. You sliced up spam, fried it in a pan, stacked it on soft white bread, and layered pickles over the top, done in under 10 minutes. It was not the prettiest meal, but it was fast, filling, and made with stuff most families already had sitting in the pantry. Spam was practically a food group during the lean years, and those jars of pickles stretched on forever, making this one of the quickest cheap lunches around. Some folks added mustard, lettuce, or even a slice of cheese if they had it, but most just kept it plain. Back then, nobody cared about gourmet ingredients or trendy recipes. Lunch was about survival, and a hot spam sandwich hit the spot when the cupboards were running bare. Pickled beet and goat cheese sandwiches were like pretty much the same thing as a lot of the recipes from the Depression era that you see persisting beyond the 50s. There's something that people back then acquired a taste for, but this combo really brought out the best of them too. Chèvre, or as we know it, goat cheese, was something that was actually not too popular in America though. It was something that French, Spanish, and Italian immigrants popularized, but it was something that was originally first introduced in America by European settlers. For most of the 17th and 18th centuries, it was a niche thing. Not exactly the main character or a big part of the B-plot, but it was a good extra in the background, sometimes the foreground, know what I mean? Lots of small-scale farming and goat dairy farms did start to open up in places like Wisconsin, Oregon, California, and Vermont, and when the health scares started, the government only started pushing things like goat's cheese more. It wasn't a big stretch to move towards sandwiches then, and the beet and goat cheese combo was already something that worked. In today's day and age, this sandwich just isn't flashy, substantial, or tasty enough to last though. But some people still keep it as a vegan-friendly option. Cold roast beef sandwiches are the perfect example of how less is sometimes more, and this wasn't just more. It was iconic. You've got some juicy roast beef, slice after slice stacked on top of each other, sandwiched between slightly crusty white bread. It's literally a Scooby-Doo snack. The beef is something seasoned with salt, pepper, and a lot of mustard, or horseradish. It's actually something that packs a pretty substantial kick. Now, sometimes people would add a slice of cheddar or Swiss cheese and throw in some fresh vegetables like lettuce and tomatoes. But the star of this show was always that decadent, juicy roast beef that was just thin enough. It had an incredibly satisfying flavor, and it was something that was really just carried by the natural flavors that were already there. No extra work needed. Cold roast beef sandwiches were something that became really common to see in American lunchboxes and deli counters by the early 20th century, especially during and after the wartime era and the Great Depression. It was one of the most economical lunches you could get for yourself, and people really wanted to be spending as little on food as possible, which is pretty different from our mindset today. Cold-fried chicken thighs were not made for picnics or company. They were working man's food. The chicken was usually fried in lard the night before, seasoned simply with salt and pepper, then packed into tin pails while it was still warm. By the time lunchtime came, the crust had softened, the fat had settled, and the flavor had deepened into something only patience could make. Miners, loggers, and farm hands ate it straight from the bone, with biscuits or cornbread if they were lucky. It was greasy, hearty, and reliable, one of those meals that filled you up without fuss. Fried chicken was too precious to waste, so the thighs and legs went to work while the white meat stayed home for Sunday. Every bite carried the memory of the skillet's sizzle, the smell of home kitchens that kept the mountains fed even when the world forgot them. Cabbage and noodles offered a humble yet satisfying lunch inspired by the Eastern European traditions many Midwestern families brought to the United States. Thin egg noodles were tossed with butter and braised cabbage until everything glistened with savory richness. A dash of black pepper and a sprinkle of salt were all it needed to shine, though some schools added onions for extra flavor. The aroma of slow-cooked cabbage filled the air, signaling a meal that was both thrifty and hearty. Students enjoyed the tender noodles and the slight sweetness of the softened cabbage, a combination that surprised even those who claimed to dislike vegetables. It was a warming dish perfect for chilly afternoons, proving that simple ingredients could create deep comfort. Lunch ladies served generous scoops that stuck to the ribs and fueled long hours of classwork and play. Cabbage and noodles may sound plain today, but in those lunchrooms, it was beloved, a quiet reminder of home-cooked heritage and shared traditions. It might not sound like much today, but back then, this quick plate was a lifesaver when groceries were tight and cooking felt like a chore. Peanut butter and lettuce sandwiches were the strange little lunch you would not believe unless you grew up eating them. You grabbed a couple slices of soft sandwich bread, spread peanut butter on both sides, and tucked in crisp iceberg lettuce, because that is what most families had in the fridge. It sounds like a bad joke now, but it was crunchy, creamy, and surprisingly filling. That is why so many old cookbooks recommended it for kids' lunchboxes and quick snacks. Some adventurous folks added raisins or sliced bananas, but most stuck with plain lettuce and peanut butter when time was short and the pantry looked empty. It was quick, weird, and stretched every last bit of food when grocery runs were few and far between. You did not have to love it, but chances are if you were around back then, you definitely remember it. They don't call this the decade of casseroles for no reason. A vegetable and rice bake was an extremely low-effort, simple and affordable casserole that became very common among working-class families in factory towns. It was also really common in farming communities throughout most of the 1970s and 1940s because it was a very easy way to stretch lots of vegetables and rice into this family-sized portion. It did all that without really cutting into your pantry either. Rice was one of the most affordable grains you could buy, and if you had a paddy field to grow them on, then that was even better. In Southern and Midwestern households, canned and frozen vegetables were always stocked as much as they could be. They were available throughout the year, most people bought them in bulk, and they were rationed out throughout the months. Now, this could even include little bits of meat if you liked it like that, but most people decided to keep it strictly on the vegetarian side. Why? Well, there's just a lot of meat dishes, especially casseroles already. And besides, with all the vegetables that people were packing into this, it was a nutritional powerhouse. Seriously, this was the kind of thing you'd take for your kids when you wanted them to grow up big and strong and everything. Factory and mill workers were always bringing these in as there were almost always leftovers to go around. Corned beef salad sandwiches are a creamy and savory blend of deli-style corned beef. They typically come mixed with your usual suspects. A little bit of mayonnaise here, some mustard there, and if you really want to be extra, some chopped pickles. These get served between sandwich bread in specific, but if you don't have that, any normal white bread will also do. So these actually have a tangier taste than you would think. And to combat that, a lot of people would also use the honey mustard sauce as a substitute for mayonnaise or even pair it up with the mayonnaise. Some versions would also throw in scrambled eggs or shredded lettuce for a better texture that plays with the corned beef itself. This is something that was extremely popular in America during the middle of the 20th century, especially after World War II ended. People were trying to bounce back from the effects of it all, and canned meats really helped save some bucks. It's something you started seeing not just at work, but at school lunches, picnics, and even potlucks, and this was doubly true for the Midwest and different parts of the South. Sweet potato biscuit sandwiches were the kind of lunch that reminded folks that thrift could taste like tenderness. The biscuits were soft and golden, their orange hue a promise of warmth even on the coldest mornings. Made with mashed sweet potatoes, flour, lard, and a touch of sorghum or molasses, they stayed moist long after they cooled. Wrapped in wax paper and carried in lunch pails or cloth sacks, they held together through fields, mills, and rail yards. Some were filled with ham or salt pork, others with apple butter or honey if luck allowed. That balance of sweet and salty made each bite feel like a small comfort earned by honest labor. Sweet potatoes were a farmer's blessing, cheap, nourishing, and long-lasting. They grew in poor soil, stored through winter, and stretched across every meal from breakfast to supper. But in biscuit form, they became something more, a taste of home that could travel anywhere. Even eaten cold, they carried the warmth of the kitchen, the memory of hands that mixed, kneaded, and baked with care. Each bite was nourishment for body and spirit, proof that a little sweetness and hard work could turn humble ingredients into something unforgettable. Waldorf apple salad brought a crisp sweetness to the lunch line, combining diced apples, chopped celery, and chewy raisins in a light mayonnaise dressing that glistened under the cafeteria lights. Each bite offered a refreshing crunch and a gentle mix of fruity and savory flavors, a welcome contrast to heavier main dishes. The bright green of the celery and the deep purple of the raisins made the salad as pretty as it was tasty, while the creamy dressing tied everything together into a single satisfying scoop. Students often poked at the raisins first, saving them like little prizes hidden among the apples. Teachers praised it as a balanced choice that provided fruit and vegetables in one dish, and the cool texture made it perfect for warm days when the kitchen ovens heated the building. Waldorf apple salad might seem simple now, but in the 1960s cafeteria, it felt delightfully sophisticated, a touch of elegance on a plastic tray that turned an ordinary school lunch into something just a bit more special. When did we let lunches like these slip out of our memories? If any of these lunches stirred an old memory, share it in the comments, tap like to keep the stories alive, and subscribe so you do not miss the next taste of the past.